This is Honors Algebra 2 Pre-Calculus. We're doing 10.4 in Pre-Calc, which is hyperbolae. We're on page 725, which is the definition of a hyperbola. So a hyperbola is the set of all points x comma y in a plane, the difference of whose distances to two fixed points, called foci, is constant. So this is what they look like, and then I'll kind of walk you through what I mean by the distance, the differences of those distances. So a hyperbola sort of looks like two parabolae, right? Like a parabola here and a parabola here, or like this, right? So, but it's going to be both of them. So it would be an opens right, opens left together. That whole unit is called a hyperbola, or an opens up, opens down together. That whole unit is called a hyperbola. There's only one axis in a hyperbola. It's the one that, essentially, it's the axis of symmetry that cuts these things in half, right? Well, I guess this is also an axis of symmetry, but, so it's the one that cuts both of the sort of parabola shapes in half, right? Both vertices fall on this axis, as does the center, and as do the two foci. As we saw when we talked about parabolae earlier in 10.2, the curves bend around the foci. We've seen that in every image we've had so far, right? So in a parabola, the parabola bends up towards the focus. In an ellipse, both of the foci are inside the ellipse, but the curve bends in towards them, right? And here, the foci are outside, and the curve bends towards the foci, right? It bends out this way towards the foci, and it bends this way, or it bends up. And okay, so this axis, the only one that we have, is called the transverse axis. So what we're going to talk about is how to graph these by hand and what the equation looks like and everything else, but it's helpful to know these values. Now, a couple pieces of information that are still relevant. Just like we saw in an ellipse, right? This distance from C to V is called A, right? This distance from C to V is called A, right? Just like we saw in an ellipse, the distance from C to the focus is called C, right? The distance from the center to the focus is called C, right? Now you might be saying, okay, cool, Hogan, but in an ellipse there was a B, and what are we going to do with that B? Well, we're going to talk about that B in a minute. It does show up when we're talking about how to sketch these graphs. So in the next video, we're going to sketch some graphs, but this is just a basic of how this works.